All right, folks, welcome. So this is the other end of the Issaquah Trolley Line today. The tracks run only to the end right here. If you look down this way, you'll see a concrete pathway on the other side of Gilman Blvd. That's the old rail bed that ran all the way into Seattle. How many of you are familiar with the Burke-Gilman Trail? All right, so the Burke-Gilman Trail is actually part of this original rail line, and Mr. Burke and Mr. Gilman are the entrepreneurs who in mid-1880s put a company together called the Seattle Lakeshore and Eastern Railroad to build this line out of Seattle and coming up and through Issaquah out eastward. The original intent was to take the railroad all the way out to Spokane and connect it with a transcontinental rail line. They were looking to compete with a rail line out of Tacoma that was already intercontinentally connected. So this was a big play and a big set of competition, if you will, trying to get something out of Seattle. The rail line out of Seattle ran from Ballard through the University District, up the western side of Lake Washington, around the north end of Lake Washington and Lake Sammamish, and then down the eastern side of Lake Sammamish, right through Issaquah here, and then it wrapped around and headed out to Snoqualmie. If any of you have been at the Northwest Railway Museum in Snoqualmie, that was part of this railroad, and it went out to North Bend. Now, like I said, the intent was to get all the way out to Spokane. Unfortunately, Mr. Burke and Mr. Gilman got just past North Bend, and they ran out of money. And they couldn't drum up enough money to get themselves over Snoqualmie Pass, so that's where this rail line ended, was out on Salal Prairie, just past North Bend. For us in Issaquah, it was a great boon to the economy. We had already discovered coal, and we had a big timber industry, as was common in the whole Northwest, in this area, but getting the goods out of Issaquah prior to the railroad was very challenging. They would have to take the goods, put it on carts, take it down to the edge of Lake Sammamish, hand load it onto barges, and then they would pole barge up Lake Sammamish, through the Sammamish Slough, down Lake Washington, through the Black River, and out to Elliott Bay in Seattle. That was a 7 to 10 day trip, so it was slow, tedious, labor intensive, and obviously you couldn't move a lot of goods that way. So even though they did take some coal and timber out that way, it was not the greatest way to go. Also, at that time, there was stagecoach service into Seattle. It was an overnight trip to get into Seattle. The roads were horrible. The stage would go up to Woodinville or Bothell. You'd spend the night at a hotel up there and finish the trip the next day into Seattle. So not a lot of people went to Seattle at that time until the railroad came in 1887. Once we had the rail line, we had passenger service every day into Seattle. It was a 3-hour trip getting into Seattle, so far better than a stagecoach, and very much like taking I-90 during rush hour today. And not only did we get people into Seattle, but also with the coal and timber industry already in motion here, it made it much easier, and coal production picked up like crazy once the rail line came in, and they had a spur that went right out to the coal mines. They would load cars and get it into Seattle within a few hours. So obviously that's far better than 7 to 10 days. And they started moving a lot of coal into Seattle, down to Elliott Bay, where they would load it onto schooners. A lot of the coal went down to San Francisco. A fair amount of coal powered the ships that either went to San Francisco or out of San Francisco, going other places. Some of that coal also went to the sugar plantations in Hawaii. Now, our coal was not the highest grade, so it generally wasn't used for like home heating. It was more about large industrial engines, like ship engines, where it would power those and operate like that. So that's where most of our coal went, as opposed to house heating. The better coal, if you will, was used for heating homes and so forth. So a little bit about our coal industry here. Like I said, the tracks went in 1887. The depot was built in 1889. And then 100 years later, we refurbished the depot, so that's what you're seeing today, is the depot refurbished. From the 1950s until the 1980s, it fell into disrepair and was essentially abandoned, and it was starting to rot away. But a group got together and fixed it up, and so it's part of our museums today. We do have another museum on the back of your ticket. There's a map where you can walk over to the Gilman Town Hall Museum. We have mining exhibits, timber exhibits, and some different things that show what life was like over 100 years ago in Issaquah. We also have our second town jail, behind that museum. It's a little concrete jail. The kids love going in there and checking out the little jail building. The first jail was made out of wood, and one night a few drunk lumbermen kicked it apart. So that one no longer exists, and they said, okay, we'll make the second one out of concrete. That one still stands today. The car we're riding on was not part of Issaquah's original history, but it gives you a sense of what it was like to leave Issaquah and come back into Issaquah via rail. This particular car was built in 1925 in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, shipped over to Lisbon, Portugal, where it operated on the streets of Lisbon, Portugal from 1925 until 1977. In 1977, this car, along with several others like it, shipped to Aspen, Colorado, where they were hoping to put a line together, and they tried for over 20 years but simply couldn't raise the funds to make that happen. In the early 2000s, when we were looking for a small car to run on the limited line that we had here, that offer came up. Aspen was looking to get rid of their cars. We picked up 2 of them. We refurbished this one using some parts from the other car and put this into operation in 2012. So we've been operating now for almost 6 years here in Issaquah with the trolley. Any questions before we turn around?